Well, good afternoon, or possibly good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. We've got quite a few attendees planning to join us for this particular webinar. So I'm going to wait just another 20-30 seconds before we get started with this. I hope y'all are having a great afternoon, and yeah, this should be an exciting webinar. While we're waiting, I'll let everybody know that in the past we've been doing these live demos or trainings for our new users. We started getting to the point where we had so many features and so many questions coming up about different topics that we ended up splitting up the 1-hour demo into 2 1-hour sessions. We took the first section and really started to focus on the account and a lot of the basics. And then what we did is we rolled in some of the more advanced features into this second one. For some of you that may be power users of Domotz, then I think you're going to find that some of this you already know, but I also think that some of it you will see some tips, tricks, new ways of thinking about things than what maybe you've used in the past. That being said, let's go over a couple housekeeping items as we get started here. First of all, this is live. We want you to ask questions, whether it's about topics you're seeing or possibly other things that you want to get answers to. Take advantage of that GoToWebinar control panel, and our team will try to answer those as fast as possible for you. We've got support guys standing by, some people from our sales team, so even if you have sales related questions. Giancarlo is on the phone with me as well, although he won't be able to be with us the whole time due to some personal things. But if I invite him to interrupt me if a question comes up that's pertinent to what we're talking about. If there are more technical or detailed questions that maybe you don't want to ask on this webinar, by all means, reach out to support@domotz.com. All right, let's look at the agenda. So on this agenda, I'm going to do a very quick recap of the 101 basics just to let you know what we talked about, just in case you want to go revisit those, or you're just dropping into this and haven't experienced Domotz before. We'll talk today about, again, some of the basics of Domotz, but a little bit more on the advanced side, and that is reporting and logging and how that gets used. We'll talk a little bit about network diagnostics and performance and the metrics that Domotz gathers there. We'll focus a little bit on network security and how you can leverage Domotz to improve the awareness of security issues that may be on the networks that you're monitoring. And then, of course, when you're managing all of these agents that are out there, right, we are assuming that you have more than one network that you're monitoring. If you're a service provider or even an integrator where you're dealing with multiple networks, sometimes you need to be able to look across all of those. And we'll talk not only about the ways you can do that today, but I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight into things that we're working on that I think you'll be pretty excited about when it comes to the dashboard. That's when we get into the more advanced side of Domotz. We'll talk a lot about device sensors, basically understanding what's going on within a device and how SNMP sensors work. We'll talk a little bit about TCP monitoring and how you can leverage that. We'll even get into some more aspects of advanced alerting. So we talked about what are alerts, what are the events that trigger alerts, but in this particular section, we'll talk about configuring of shared alerts. Not so much like how to do the actual configuration, but maybe how you can get in and optimize the configuration of these alerts. We'll also talk about the alert digest and then snoozing of alerts, which may seem a little bit mundane, but I think you guys will find that both of these, the digest and the snoozing, are actually quite powerful tools depending on how you work at the office. And then lastly, we'll do a little bit of discussions around setting up of external services. So when you're dealing with wireless access points like Ubiquiti or Meraki, we'll use those as examples and show where you set those up and give a little bit of insight into how you do that. We won't go into great details about that, and same with when we're talking about documentation services, because those require accounts and API keys, but at least we can have a discussion about places to go and where you can find information about setting all of that up. With that being said, let's get into some of the discussions around Domotz here. So let's show the Domotz application. Let's make sure that it is nice and large for everybody to see here. We talked before in the Domotz 101 class about account creation, how you create an account. We talked also about your team, right? How a team master and team members work and how they relate to each other. Then, of course, we pointed out field operators. Along with that, in our team management discussion, we talked about two-factor authentication. We talked about single sign-on and SAML. And as I said in that session, I absolutely encourage you to be leveraging 2FA or some sort of single sign-on platform for security purposes within your account. And I'll continue to iterate that every time I talk about Domotz and we talk about cybersecurity and how you should mitigate risks associated with your network when it comes to cyber threats. We talked about agent configuration, how you set up an agent, the different types of agents that are out there. We talked about when an agent has been deployed and it starts discovering devices, how you can go in and adjust all the properties associated with that, whether it's the location of those devices or the names and make, manufacturer type. We talked a little bit about how you can optimize those things for your particular environment, especially when it comes to naming convention, not only of devices, but also of the agents themselves when you're dealing with those. We talked about alerting and the proactive aspects of Domotz, so being able to proactively monitor devices and how that really helps, and we kind of rolled this back into the value proposition of Domotz, which is really about documentation and awareness of devices that are out there, but then being able to get proactive alerts, right? Knowing that something's wrong before your customer gives you that call, getting away from the break fix model of doing business and going to more of a service-centric proactive approach. And it's really the alerting that really helps drive that. And when we get into shared alerts, we'll talk about how that can help. You can optimize that even further. And then, of course, we talked about the connectivity. So once an issue arises on a system, how do you connect to it, whether it's individually to a specific device or when it goes to doing a VPN connection and creating that secure connection actively there. So those are the things we talked about in 101. I absolutely invite you to revisit that. If any of this is unfamiliar, you're going to see me kind of pushing through some things as we do demos, and that will hopefully give you some insight if you need it. All right, so let's just dive right into the reporting and logging. I've got a lot of notes that I've written down here that we're gonna talk about. So, forgive me if I pause. This is the first time we're doing this advanced training. And by all means, I wanna get your feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like. So as you're listening, as you're taking notes, send us an email, send a message to support@domotz.com or reply to our invite here, and we'll take that to heart, because this is, like I said, is the first time we're doing this. We're trying to make sure this is useful for everybody. So the first thing that we want to look at is reports. So again, when you go into a particular site, I don't think I've configured this site, you'll notice that under the tiles tab, or under the tiles where we're viewing the status of this particular network, you'll see a login and reports tile. It's this tile that becomes a very, very powerful tool for you and your business. From a reports perspective, and let's start with that before we talk about logging, you absolutely have the ability to manually generate a report on demand. You also can set it up to be automatic, so that once every 30 days, it's really the first of the month, a report will automatically get generated. When it comes to either the manual or automatic configuration, they're both very similar, but you need to add a recipient that you want to have receive the alert, so easy enough to add an email. It's important to note at this point, you can definitely put in a customer's account if that's what you wish to have that report go to, if you want to have it go directly to a customer. You may recall in our discussion previously that when you're setting up your account, you have this account and branding section on the left that opens up your portal. That is where you put in your company information. You'll put in your logo for your company. It is that information that gets sent with this report or inside this PDF that goes out. So keep that in mind if you want to use this to send information to your customer. I've always said that communications with your customer is extremely important. And when you have when you have a service level agreement in place, making sure that they're getting those communications to understand what they're really paying for, whether it's on a monthly or annual basis, is really, really important. Inside these reports, you can add a lot of different content, okay, and you can structure how it gets placed. So if you want to add information about the network itself, you know, the uptime on it, you can add that, any of the connection or the history through a chart, you can add those details here by clicking the check boxes. If you want to rearrange how these things show up, you can absolutely do that too. So putting one section on top of the other means that in the report or the PDF that you send out, it will go in order as you specify. Even getting to the point where all the activity logs, which we're going to talk about next, can be sent to your user. If you want more information about it, by all means, just click on the help section. But I encourage you guys to take one of your sites, click on this information, send yourself a report on this particular device. In fact, let's just see how live demos will work here. So while I'm talking about logging, I'll wait for that message to come in. It can take a couple minutes depending on how busy the servers are. But the login information, the activity login, let's talk a little bit about that. I find this extremely useful for you as a service provider, you as an integrator, to really understand what's going on in the network from your team's perspective. So if you have employees, team members, field operators, in this case, using the Domotz language, logging into particular sites or this site in particular, you're going to see their information pop up in these logs. We're going to take the name of the person. So in this case, Giancarlo made an access he opened up a VPN tunnel to this particular site. It shows the time and the date at which he did that. And then any other things that may have happened related to connections. I will point out, because we get this question a lot, even though you open up a tunnel into that system, or if you open a direct connection to a particular device, okay, so here I maybe opened a TCP tunnel to this port on this particular system. It's not going to show the changes that were made because of the way we encrypt and securely transmit data from the laptop, the PC, through the cloud back into that network. But if something does go wrong, you are at least going to get information about, it's nice when Microsoft Teams all of a sudden starts trying to connect here. You are going to get information about the different types of connections that were made into a given system. If you take a snapshot from a security camera, that's going to get logged here as well. Let me do this. Let me bring up that report. It should be here now, so I can now see it. Let me double click this. Let me bring this up here. So here you'll see that I generated that report. It went to my personal email address. It says it's a report for this particular site. It has information about when it was generated or for the time period at which it was generated. You'll notice that it's giving you information for the past 30 days, and it includes this PDF. If I double click on this PDF, it's going to open up here. Now you can see that for this particular site, here's my logo. So if this was your company logo that you've entered in the branding information, it would show up there. And then all of the information about it. In fact, by the way, you'll notice it says yoursitehere.com. That essentially would be your website that you've entered inside the account and branding section. But then all sorts of basic information about the address, about information about the agent, whatever I clicked on, it's showing you that type of data. So here we looked at WAN performance, and I wanted to see the history of that. But then all of the details about particular devices on the network, when they were seen, what their IP addresses were. Is this meant to be a comprehensive diagnostic tool or report for your customers? Absolutely not. But what it does do is it provides you with a means of communication and discussion points. You may not, depending on your business and how you work with your customers in the SLAs, you may not need to send this to them on a regular basis. Maybe what you do is you send it to yourself on a regular basis, and then you compile that information into a quarterly report for business reviews or whatever it may be. But fundamentally, this is about aggregating information on these networks and then making it available to you and your customers. So here's an example of like the logs that we were showing. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of view onto the reporting and logging section in particular within Domotz. I do want to point out another thing, which is this export tab. There's two ways in which you can export all this data. You can either create a CSV file and email it to you. It emails to the account that you're logged in as here. Another mechanism that you have, which I've shown this before, but I'll show it again, if you are running the desktop application and you're on the device list tab, you can then export that device list to an Excel file. I will save this off to my desktop here, and then I should have had Excel open, so it's just going to take a second while I open that. But then you can see you can see all the type of information that you can get. The beauty of this page actually is that not only do you get all of the information that I'm about to show you, but you also have the ability to make changes within this Excel file. And when you make these changes, so or filter by devices, you can then save and import those changes back into the system. So very powerful tool when it comes to reporting and logging. If you want to get more information about this particular section and making changes, revisit the 101 tutorial. Okay, network diagnostics and performance. So one of the powerful features of Domotz is being able to understand what's going on inside the network and outside the network. I've already shown some graphs of this, but when it comes to your internet service provider, Domotz is set up to do testing once every 6 hours if you have this enabled. So under the network performance tile, you can, it's enabled by default, so you could actually disable it if you want to. You do have the ability to select between MLab or FAST as the speed test methodology. One thing that I want to say about FAST and MLab, or even Ookla if you're using that, there are so many considerations about what can happen on the network that will cause degradation in performance. In fact, we have this long-winded message here that talks about what happens when you do testing, but placement of the agent within the network, router configurations, the ISP itself, and more importantly, I think location of the servers that are being used for the testing also make a very big difference. Part of the reason that we chose MLab as the primary method, but even FAST, is because it is a true test that goes from inside the network through the ISP out to an external server. When you're leveraging something like Ookla, you often find that Ookla is set up to have servers at the ISP, so you're never really going outside the ISP network when you're doing an Ookla test. So that's just something to consider as well. We have lots of information and comments about this. I know our support team gets questions about this all the time, but I definitely encourage you to read information about why these tests are. Another thing that affects the performance is the host that the Domotz agent is running on. If you're running on a Raspberry Pi that's limited to a 10100 NIC or network interface card, you're only going to get 100 megabit performance. If you're running on a high-end server that's connected to a 10 gig interface, you're obviously going to get a lot better performance out of that. So just keep those things in mind. So the WAN ISP is one thing you can do. From an external ISP perspective as well, you can do route analysis as well, where you're actually testing again from the Domotz agent to the path. Here, I've just used Spotify as the default service. This takes a little bit of time, like 20, 30 seconds to do kind of the final analysis, depending on how many packets you're sending. But you'll be able to see how the system performed, what were the hops that it was going on, were there packet losses in this. So these are some of the external features you have. I think the last thing I want to say here is, and this gets used more often than not, a lot of times people want to understand what is the public IP address of this particular network that I'm dealing with. Domotz captures that information. And just so you know, when we talk about alerts, and we mentioned this again in the 101 class, you do have the ability to set alerts based on changes in public IP address. So keep that in mind. Another important aspect of the testing that we do is round trip delay. So let's just grab one of these wireless access points here. So in this case, this is a hardwired device. So it's not going to vary a whole lot. I'm glad to see there's no packet loss. But when we are doing round trip delay testing, so in our, when we have our full featured agent out there, Domotz will ping every single device. We'll essentially do what's called an ICMP echo request or ping. We will check for not only packet loss, but also how long did it take for that particular device to respond. And we will record that over time. Here you can see actually that we had some areas where I was getting a high amount of packet loss or even high percentage of packet loss. The concern that you really should have as you're leveraging this data, I'm assuming that most of you understand how pings work. It's not so much that you may have a certain amount of latency. I mean, here this device is 5 to 10 milliseconds, depending on how you look at it or where you look at it. But it's more, do you have large amounts of data changing over time? Okay, that's when you start to have a concern. In fact, if I go back to, let's go find a wireless device that may be on the network. This is probably here's a wireless device. So here you're going to see large variation. For a device that latency should not be changing, I think of things like voice over IP systems, unified communications, anywhere where you're dealing with audio packets and two-way communication where latency can be damaging to the system, this becomes a valuable tool. When latency increases over time, or you can see here it's kind of decreasing over time, it's usually because something on the network has changed. We've definitely seen instances where the latency will be very, very flat, and then all of a sudden at a particular date, the latency jumps up significantly. That is usually an indication that something got placed on the network that is now consuming packets, maybe has higher priority packets, but you should consider that as a debug tool to say, okay, what changed on this particular date? Go back and look at the device list and see what got added on that particular date so that you can start to look at the behavior and make adjustments as appropriate. One thing I want to point out as well with this is round trip delays can also be done for external sites. Let me go back to this particular site because this is where we have one right at the beginning. You have the ability to set up an external host and ping external hosts. Here I'm doing a BlueJeans server, but one thing you can do is check the latency outside of the network as well. So from the Domotz agent's perspective out to a host, we're pinging it. The good news is that our service here is pretty stable. You get some variation in the max number, but this is a good sign that says the network is up and running all the time. A point to make, while the Domotz agent proactively monitors for connectivity to the cloud under its own service, this is a great way for you to validate that the external cloud is also up and running. So if you want to do a packet loss alert for an external host and take an alert on that, you can actually get a much faster response for a loss of external network connectivity. Something to keep in mind. Okay, let's see. I mentioned this, or maybe it's obvious, but I do want to point out that latency checking is extremely valuable for purposes, like I said, voice over IP, unified communications. I would definitely use caution when you are trying to do latency testing or round trip delay testing on Wi-Fi based devices. It's not that those devices aren't any less important than the others, but there's a lot of variation that can occur due to Wi-Fi. For integrators out there, if you're using other 2.4 gigahertz services like Zigbee, Z-Wave, depending on what activity, what channels those are on, Bluetooth is another one that's in that range. It can affect the radios and the performance that you see. So just keep that in mind. Okay, good. Enough discussion about some of the network diagnostic capabilities. Obviously, there's more that can be said about this, but in the interest of time, I want to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about network security. Again, another basic feature within Domotz, but often misunderstood. Domotz is not a SOC. We're not a security operations center, nor do we really want to be at this point in time. We are meant to help give you awareness about what's going on in the network. That being said, I think awareness of the devices that are on the network, as well as any information about that network that could cause cybersecurity holes or threats, we think it's important that we bring that awareness to you, okay? From a network security point of view, we can look at when new devices are discovered. So if you're monitoring a network in general, and you've established a data network, maybe you've established a security network for security cameras, possibly access control systems, even if they're on a separate VLAN, which I'd probably recommend, you can check for new devices being added to those. It makes sense that if a new device gets added to the security LAN that you are supposed to be monitoring, that you should probably have awareness of what that is, because it's probably you that owns it and you know what's changing. I would say the same thing to commercial integrators that are dealing with unified communication systems or voice over IP systems, where you're dealing with VoIP LANs. Okay, if a new device shows up on there and it's not recognizable, you should figure out what to do with that. Okay, log into it, find it. The good news is that Domotz is going to do its best to give you awareness about what those devices are, when they came on the network, what their IP addresses were, and if they're still there, we're going to flag that as well. Another important part of network security is understanding the ports that are being opened on these LANs. So ports coming into the LAN from the WAN side can be checked through what we call TCP open port scanner, okay? In this instance, you can see that on this network, we see 44.158 has been open. When there is a device or a port on the network, let me see if I can find one with more security issues here. 52 security issues. I bet we can find something here. When we see that there are ports that are open on this particular network, we're going to flag that. We're going to tell you what the port is. We're going to tell you when we discovered that it was open. Keep in mind, this is essentially ports being opened at the firewall level. So at your router or firewall, the Domotz cloud is looking back into the network and trying to see, hey, are there particular ports open? We're not telling you what they are. We're not telling you what traffic is going over them. We're just letting you know that this particular port is open to something on the inside. It is up to you to say whether that is a known port and should be approved or be rejected. I want to point out that if you approve this, okay, essentially it puts it on a safe list and it will flag it down at the bottom of the list, right? Ports that are marked as safe. If it is rejected, it will delete this from the list here. But in another 24 hours, as we're scanning the network, if it's open again, we're going to flag it. Okay? The assumption, if that was a port that you wanted to have closed, you're logging into the firewall, you're logging into the router to then close that. We do the exact same thing when it comes to ports being opened on the inside, out, through UPnP. Universal plug and play is a fairly legacy technology, but we still see ISP routers, ones that you may get from Comcast, CenturyLink, wherever, Cox, that will keep UPnP enabled by default. Most service providers know to turn this thing off, but if somebody purchases a device, even Wi-Fi, right, they bring it into the office, they put it on the network, often it is going to look for UPnP because it is the easiest way to get outside a network and access the cloud. Most systems today do not need UPnP and they have other methods. So we recommend that you disable it. But if you do need it open and there are devices on the network that are opening these ports, we're going to bring those to your attention. Again, approval, denial of this, whatever you need to do in order to bring awareness to that. So fundamentally, this is what we're doing from a network security perspective. One thing I will point out, you'll notice that in my account, I have this default passwords tab. This is in beta right now, but we want to get your information about this and where you think this is valuable. Right now, what this is showing is when a particular device is using its password, a basic password and username, okay, the default username and password, if it had such thing. We're going to test that and bring awareness to you. For right now, this only works with devices that we have drivers for, but we think that it's going to be a valuable tool because you can imagine if you have an open port from the outside going to a device that's using the common username and password, that is a hacker's dream right there. Of course, you can set alerts on these types of issues as well. Again, something that we talked about in the 101 class, so I'm not going to focus on that at this point. What I am going to do is read my notes and make sure that I've covered the things that I really care about here. Yeah, I want to point out that in order to do a lot of these network checks, especially the device discovery for VLANs and subnets, you need to make sure that those are configured. We talked about the configuration of those in the earlier class as well. The last thing before we get into some more details, the management of all your agents and all your devices. This is something that we released within the last 6 months, but we have found that this is an extremely powerful tool. We're going to talk about this Manage tab first, but then I'm going to show you this monitoring dashboard, which is going to be made available to everybody on the 1st of October timeframe. So let's talk a little bit about why this tab is so powerful. When you look at Domotz from this screen, you're essentially seeing an inventory of all of the networks that you're monitoring. In order to understand what's going on inside each network, you have to click on it and you have to go to the device list. So then you can see all the devices, and of course you can dive down or drill down into those devices and get status about those. The Manage tab on the left-hand side of the Domotz application gives you the ability to search across all of your agents, all the networks that you're monitoring for very specific systems. So one example that I usually show is if I type the word Cisco, I will see all of the devices in a list that relate to Cisco in some way, shape, or form. It could be the manufacturer, it could be within the name of the device. In fact, another thing I like to show is if I type the word main here, we will see information that's not on the device itself, but if I go to, oops, I changed it recently now that I think about it. But if I, this device isn't a great example, but if I have a information in like a bonjour name or a DHCP name where the word main shows up, we would see that, even if it's in the NetBIOS or ZeroConf names. So this is a very powerful way to find very specific systems or devices that relate to this particular system. Yeah, here's a great example, main switch, right, for the SNMP name. So you can do some very specific searching. In fact, if I go back to this example, let's say I want to find Apple devices, which you know there are going to be hundreds of those, but I want to do more of an advanced search where I say tied to agent that contains the word demo. So we'll see. Oh, none of them have that. Okay, that's great. If I did advanced and agent, and I think the IoT lab has one, I'm sure. So this is going to bring back any agent name with IoT in it that has the word Apple. So you can see how you can narrow down a lot of these systems and devices. But here's where the value really comes in. Whether you're doing this at the device level or even at a particular agent level, if I want to take the configurations within Domotz that's associated to this particular device, let's assume this Apple TV2 on the IoT Synology agent is one that I want to save off. I'm using this as a template for all of my systems, okay? I can then take and export this information associated within Domotz to a particular file. So we'll just save this off to the desktop again. But now I want to take that information and pass it on to these devices here for whatever reason, okay? You'll notice that when I select multiple devices, I get all of these different values. But if I wanted to change it so that I am getting all the information that I care about in there, such as I wanted to check status every 30 seconds, if I had shared alerts or any SNMP sensors associated with this particular device that I wanted to push as a template to all my other devices, I could easily check that and bring that information in. Another valuable tool, absolutely, when it comes to SNMP is being able to push the public-private community strings or the read and read-write community strings into that system. If I'm using V3, SNMP V3, I can push the credentials associated with the security, okay, into that system. If I want to associate all of these particular devices as important or not important, as may be the case, I can do that. So very, very powerful tool. I'm not going to do it with these just since it's a demo, but you can see how you can take a particular device or a particular agent settings and push configurations all at one time. I think when we talk about shared alerts, that's really where it's becomes super powerful. So if I wanted to use this IoT lab here with shared alerts and save this off and then edit that across all these other ones, I absolutely can do that. Let me check here. Yep, so this helps with, I'm checking my notes. This helps with multi-tenancy, giving visibility to all your networks. It allows you to find very specific devices. So if you wanted to look at all the devices within all your networks that are related to Cisco SG350, so you know which sites you need to do firmware updates to, very easy way to search and look for that. Okay, let's talk about another powerful tool before we get into some of the last interesting parts. So this is just in beta right now, so this is always changing, at least over the next few weeks. But one of the things that we have felt was extremely important for our users is the ability to see across all of your agents, but in a single dashboard. So if I did care, and in this case, I'm looking at Luxel information on all my networks. So if I wanted to add a dashboard here, and in this case, let's go look at Cisco. I can create a Cisco dashboard. I can add one or more monitoring tables that relate to that. So let's put in the word Cisco, and then let's take it a step further. I don't know if my models, if any of the models I have the word 350 in it. Okay, so I'm looking for Cisco SG350s. Okay, the assumption would be that these 4 devices are the SG350s that I have been dealing with across all my agents. You'll notice this one's on a Draper office. This is in a Draper office running on Windows, so it's probably the same office. We've got an agent running on a Latte Panda here, and then another office, okay? They're actually all of the same here, but you can see that I want to capture these. So I will add these to my table. Oh, shit, yeah. Oh, I'm not supposed to say curse words on my demos, apologies. What I wanted to do was go in and edit some of the columns, the information that we see within these. Once I were to add those devices, I can then say what needs to show up. If I want to look at model numbers, if I wanted to look at location and zone of these, if I want to add information like of all these devices, what's the average packet loss? And maybe we should do like worst case round trip delay from the agent's perspective. I can apply this type of information to these tables. If I decide that I want to add more devices, so let's just say, for instance, okay, I care about these SG350s, but I want to add to this particular table these, let's see, let's go add an Andrew's MacBook, okay, because for some reason Andrew's MacBook is really important. We can start to customize these tables and show the information that we care about inside a single dashboard. If I want to go add another monitoring table to this particular view that relates to Cisco, I can. So let's do Cisco, and then let's go look for, I think if I do name, and I think if I type the word phone, right? Because maybe I want to look for all of the Cisco phones that are in this environment. I can now create another table which will show me these details. I care about the model and the location. And I want to, again, add round trip delay. Maybe let's see what SNMP status has. Okay. And then I can, yes, name it, because these are Cisco phone things. So herein lies a very powerful tool to show you the details that you care about on the agents and the devices that you care about. We're going to continue to add columns on here. One of the most important things that we're going to add is actually not only SNMP status, but SNMP variables. That is kind of the final thing that we want to add to the system. So if you're looking at, let's just say, an HP printer, and you want to check the status of the cyan, the magenta, the yellow, and the black cartridges, or the toner levels, you should be able to see that directly in the table. And then in the future, move away from not only monitoring, but actual proactive alerting when a particular value goes outside of a threshold that you care about. So while you don't see this information today inside your applications, you are going to be seeing this capability in the October timeframe. If you're listening to this webcast right now, this webinar, and you feel like you could utilize some of this, send support@domotz.com a message, and we can probably give you beta access to this so you can check it out and you can start to play with it. We're always open to feedback and trying to get an understanding of how useful these things are or are not. Okay, so those are all of the basic, I guess the basic stuff that I wanted to touch on. You know, we talked a little bit about reports and logging, network diagnostics and performance, how to use those, the network security side of Domotz and how you should be leveraging that. And then of course, this managing of all the systems. And this leaves us with a little bit of time in the last 15 minutes to get to some of the more details. I'm not going to go in a mass amount of detail on this. It's more to give you insight as to where you should be looking when it comes to some of these capabilities. So let's first talk about getting more information out of devices themselves. So if we go to this particular site and we look at the device list, you guys know that we can see SNMP, but I always like to use this particular device because it's meant for SNMP. When we discover a device, we're going to look for all the services that are available. the very first thing that we are going to do is, or one of the first things after we discovered all the ports, is we're also going to look at ports 161, if I remember correctly, if that's the SNMP port. We're going to see if it's open, and we're going to see if the default credentials are available on it. And we talked about how to set these, but just as a recap, you know, if the system is set up with public and private on the read and read-write community strings, we're going to try that. If you need to go to something like v3 and add the user and authentication type, by all means do that. But once we have that information in there, we are going to give you a lot of capabilities here. Under the SNMP tab, you're going to see the status and whether it's open or available or not. If there is a device that we think should be available, but it is not, we're going to let you know. I think this basement WAP is probably a great example where, you know, no SNMP service is enabled on this particular device, so it's registering as not found. But going back into the Geist watchdog, one thing I'll tell you about how we manage SNMP, when we see that it's available, we will cross-check the MAC address, any information that we can get across that device with our database of MIBs that are out there. We'll even try to interrogate the MIBs to see if it will tell us which MIBs should be associated with this. When we discover a device and the MIBs that we have available in our database, we will tell you, hey, these are the things we think you care about. If you want to search for a particular MIB, like here I'll type the word temperature, we can discover which OIDs, right, object identifiers, are available to that sensor within this MIB that's associated with this particular device. You can either add it directly if we're looking at the sensor, or in the case of a table, you can open that up and see which sensors beyond that table are available for configuration, okay? I'm not going to add this particular sensor here, but what this is showing you is how you can add these sensors to a device where we have a MIB. Now, in some cases, you guys may be dealing with devices where we don't have a MIB, if it's some new device or if it's a custom device of some sort. By all means, send us that MIB, send it to support@domotz.com, and we'll get it entered into our database. So that way, the next time that we do discover that device, or when it's on another network, those MIBs will be ready for you. So let me close out of this. Let me show you the power of some of these sensors. When we do discover these, you will see that we start to collect that data, start aggregating the information. We can look at this over time. I mean, here we're looking at dew point, so it's really changing with respect to temperature, pressure, etc. But if we look at temperature, you're going to see. I will point out, right, this particular sensor is not running 982 degrees at this point. What it is seeing is 98.2. It's important to note that we are showing the sensor value as it comes to us numerically. This is coming in tenths of a degree, so we just need to understand that this is actually 98.2 here. We do that with all of the information. You do need to understand you know, very specifics about those particular devices. Even if I were to like look at this Synology, right, a hard drive, and look at its SNMP data. Here we can search for storage used, but I mean, this is really, I have roughly 18 terabytes on this particular Synology, but you can see that it's has a slightly different numerical value because of the way that they read this. And this system is kind of maxed out, which is why I don't see a ton of fluctuation on the used side of it. You can, of course, set alerts on these when it comes to alerts. Not going to go into details on this particular webinar, but I do want you to be aware that you can do that. TCP. So actually, let's go back to that Geist watchdog, because I know that we have a service running here. What is TCP services? So this is the ability to check that a particular port running on a device is open or it's responding to commands. The most common TCP service that we see people utilizing is port 80 on a particular device. So you're looking for web connectivity or web page connectivity to a particular device. You may look at port 443. In some instances, even if you look at the Domotz agent, you're looking at port 3000. So you can then add this port here. And so what this will do is the Domotz agent will ping port 80 looking for it to be valid. I would point out that a very common use case for this is if you're dealing with a control system, or if you're dealing with a server that's hosting web pages. Being able to ping that that system is up and running, that the web page is running, is really, really valuable. You can even look at external hosts, right, and look to see that those pages are running, right, or particular ports on its service is running. Very good for RDP on servers. So if you're looking at remote desktop protocol on, like, let's say this Dell server that's running here. I think I have RDP set up, but if I wanted to check that it's actually running, I can have a TCP service flag me and alert me if that goes down for whatever reason. Okay, one thing that I want to mention that is coming extremely soon, but it's not here yet, and I'm not sure if Giancarlo is online or wants to comment, but when it comes to particular PCs, virtual machines, the ability to check that there's a certain version of OS, like WinRM or whatever, running and giving you the OS details, things like version numbers, patch information, what the architecture is, that is information that is coming very soon. And frankly, I'm pretty excited about that because it's the first pass into how we can also help validate that devices are running on operating systems that you care about and don't need patches, or if there are CVEs associated with those, whether they can be managed. Giancarlo, are you online? Is there anything you want to say about that in particular before I moved on to advanced alerting? Oh, I take it silence is golden here. So that's probably good. Okay, so we showed how to set up the sensors. We showed how to deal with TCP services. I think over the next couple of weeks, we'll show you the OS management aspect. Let's talk about configuring shared alerts and then how to deal with like digests in our last little bit here. Okay, so first and foremost, we talked before about shared alerts. I talked about this briefly. The thing I want to point out with shared alerts is in order for a shared alert to work, we need to configure not only the channel by which we are pushing the alert, and I would point out as well that the reason they're called shared alerts is because you can push it to more than one channel. In this example here, you see that I'm pushing an alert to not only Microsoft Teams, but I'm also pushing it to Datto's PSA tool, just as an example. We can talk about all the different other contact channels that are available, whether they're PSA tools or messaging systems, or even dealing with webhooks. But the thing I want to point out here is please visit help.domotz.com to get visibility into exact configurations for these. One example is if I take Kaseya here, you'll see very specific information to Kaseya about what you need to add there. And all of this is going to be very specific to your account. In some instances, there may be APIs that are required, and we're going to ask you for that. But under help.domotz.com, you're going to see all of the specifics for that. Once you've configured a particular channel and set it up for your account and associated it to the given sites, if that's what's needed, you then can create the shared alert. Rather than creating it, I'll just go into edit, because this is what happens here. You'll give that shared alert a name. You will set up the events that will trigger that particular alert. It is possible for you to have more than one shared alert on a given device or on a given agent. The reason we do that is there may be slightly different configurations or channels that you care about for certain types of alerts. For instance, if you wanted to have alerts go to your PSA tool that were associated with very specific devices, whether they go up, down, or there are configuration changes on the managed switches, or to the discussions we just had about SNMP or TCP. If you wanted a channel that only associated with high temperature values based on SNMP sensors, you can create a very specific shared alert for that and put it into a very specific contact channel if that's what you wanted to do. Of course, you can deal with things like color configuration so that when those alerts come across, you know the type of alert it is and it helps you better organize systems. But this is something that you can do. After you have selected the contact channels, after you've selected which events within the system should trigger these particular alerts, it's up to you to actually enable those shared alerts in a particular device. A few things I'll point out here just as I go to the IoT lab. You can either go into the device itself or you can go into the alert settings and then select those devices. You'll notice that it opens up to the shared alerts tab. Before in the 101 class, we talked about the personal alerts, but in the shared alerts, you'll see like this Blue Gene server is configured to MSP or MS Teams and Data, which we were just looking at. But if I wanted to add a second one, because I'm doing this particular video, I can see that, and now it has both of those. I will remind you that when it comes to the global manage, if this particular site was set up that this is the way I want all of my sites or all of these particular devices configured, I can go to the Manage tab and then push that same information across 1, 10, even hundreds of sites at one time. So, powerful way of pushing that. Let's talk about digests. So when you click on the Alert Digest, and let's talk about what this is, it'll open up your portal, and under your settings and in the services, you'll notice this Domotz Daily Digest. If you are a manager, if you're on some sort of set schedule where you're in the office from 8 to 5, you may want to get alerts live at that time. But during the hours of 5:01 to 7:59 in the morning, you may want to, rather than having your inbox full of alerts or your inbox full of alerts, you may want to set up the Alert Digest. Okay, right now this is disabled, but what I can do is set a time window such that between the hours of 8:30 a.m., in this case we should probably put it 8:30 p.m. and 9:30 a.m. on the next day, we will basically consolidate all of the alerts that are associated to me that I care about into a single email. You can also configure it such that if in your account, you don't want to get all of the emails anyway, maybe you're on vacation and you just want to get once per day, right? And once every 24 hours, we'll send you a consolidated list of those reports because you want to look at it during a set time. You can set that up to do that as well. This digest we find is extremely powerful for support teams or people that are on the road or working remotely and they can't take time to answer every single email, but they do want to have specific times that they get this. So keep this digest in mind and take advantage of it because it's a powerful tool for a lot of our users. One more thing that I will say when it comes to alerts is that of snoozing. So two ways you can deal with alerts. First of all, if you're logged into your account and you want to disable all alerts to your system, you can do it right here. On the left-hand side, you'll notice account alerts can be disabled. Very useful for you. Again, if you're going on vacation and you've got somebody else managing the alerts or looking at that, you can disable all of this. This is also extremely powerful when you know you are if a particular site is down or there's maintenance going on or you're taking the network down on purpose so that you can either add devices, do firmware upgrades, do whatever it is you do, you can disable this so your ticketing system is not getting overwhelmed with false alerts. So just another way you can help manage that. Another setup that you can have here is under the network tab. Under agent alerts, you have the ability to disable specific agent alerts. Keep in mind the account alerts goes across all your agents within your account. The agent alerts go very specific to that agent. If I hit disable, you'll see that yes, you can disable this particular agent which by the way, I should say, if you're working on a particular site, the assumption is you're disabling an agent and not your whole account. But if you want to snooze it, so if you want to say, hey, look, for the next 48 hours, we're going to be working on this. So, don't climb it up here to 12 hours or whatever, and I can set specific dates where it'll say, hey, snooze until this particular time. You can do that. If you want to, oh, this is what I was looking for. If you wanted to say, I'm going to snooze this thing for four days and 0 hours, I can do that as well. When you hit snooze, essentially any alerts associated with this particular agent will no longer come to your system. Okay. So again, something to be aware of. If you want more information on this, please visit help.domotz.com. I can see I'm running out of time here, but I'm going to talk about one last thing, and then I will check to see if we have any particular questions, and that is external services. We're not going to go into a ton of detail here, but actually, I don't want to use this site. Let's use one where we actually have a service running. So we'll take Giancarlo's here. So external services. External services are used when Domotz has what we call a driver, or when we are interrogating a cloud-based service for information about the devices that are on the network. Commonly used with Ubiquiti, commonly used with Meraki as just examples. So here you can see that we've discovered Meraki devices, and it's likely that they have cloud services on there. Again, I'm not going to go into details, but I want to point out that if you are dealing with Meraki, if you are dealing with Ubiquiti and Unify, this is where you will set up these external services. Okay, so you'll go to the device list, and then on the right-hand side, it'll give you the ability to set up these services. You can then connect your account. Of course, you'll need your API key and the organization name associated with the agent or the network that you're monitoring. But once you insert that information, you will then get the access to the available services that we have drivers for on there. Let me point out that documentation services perform in a similar way. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice that we have this services tab. In some instances, we will, like, these connected services are ones that are already associated with our account, meaning that we've set that up. Of course, you can click the settings and go reconfigure things or change it if necessary. For services like IT Glue, documentation-wise, you can actually add information. So here we're asking you to add the API key, which then associates your IT Glue account with Domotz. And then when you get into the connection and the management, you can set up synchronization as appropriate, whether it's from Domotz to IT Glue or vice versa, depending on who's the master account. And then, well, with all of these, I want to point out that your help.domotz.com is where you can find more information about how to set up your account in this. The last thing that I want to point out on this page, if you do see an arrow, this is often pointing towards either the help.domotz site, or it's going to point to the third-party services website to talk about setting up these integrations. We're constantly working with partners to either create these integrations, or if they create the integrations, we're trying to bring those into our system, and we're bringing those in on a fairly regular basis. Okay, so I've gone over my time by about 5 minutes. I do want to say, look at, be sure to look at help.domotz.com for a lot more of these advanced details and information when it comes to connectivity to third-party software, whether it's dealing with third-party services and connecting to systems over Domotz through VPN or through TCP tunnels. We've got information there. When it comes to documentation in these services, like we're talking about here, lots of information on help.domotz.com. The one thing that Giancarlo and I were talking about is that we're getting into a lot of details here, and we still haven't talked about some more advanced stuff like APIs and how to work with those. We do have webinars from our engineering team and technical team that I encourage you to watch those webinars. but we show you how to do advanced reporting, how to do advanced dashboards. So check those things out. Our YouTube channel and our webinar pages provide a lot of that information that's coming from our technical teams. So I'm not sure if Giancarlo was able to make it back and whether he is joining us, but let me say this, in looking at a lot of the questions, it looks like a lot of our team has answered these. I think what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, probably have us sign off at this point. We're going to take all of these questions and try to roll those into the next time that we do this demo, and we're going to try to optimize this for time so that way we're focused on our 1 hour. Please feel free to send us feedback on this webinar. Please send it to support@domotz.com, or you can email me directly, jb@domotz.com as well. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.